that table like set over there. Wait a minute.
Clean your
We got a lot of activity going on up here, but it's all good. It's all good. Got Larry Johnson, an alcoholic. Because of God's grace and Alcoholics Anonymous, my sobriety date is the 18th of September 1972, and I'm very thankful for that. And I'm glad to be here. I think I'm glad to be here. I want to thank Tom for asking me to do this. I'm not a stranger to this group. There's a lot of people in this room that can give this talk for me. If something happens and I happen to fall over or something while I'm doing this, don't worry, there'll be somebody come up and can finish it. Because a lot of people in here have heard this story before. And thank Tom for the kind introduction. My favorite introduction was the one where someone said that some of us have heard Larry before, and some of us have not. And those of us who have not are looking forward to hearing him now. Figure, you can take at it 2 or 3 different ways, if you happen to be the one on the receiving end of an introduction like that. I was thinking this afternoon, I was thinking about what I would talk about, and I run several possibilities through my head, and I'm really only qualified to do one thing, and that's to tell my story as best I can. And the story doesn't change prior to the last time you heard me. There have been some changes since I was here last. I was here last year at this same meeting up here. I've been here a couple of times since then. This is almost less, to me, it's like almost talking to my home group. And except it's a lot bigger than my home group. We used to have a big home group, but we also got some big resentments in there, and then it became a little home group. And there's about 4 or 5 other little home groups scattered around, but everybody's still doing good, so it seems. The only way I know how to do this is just the way I've always did it. I don't even know why I even got into that exercise this afternoon about some of the stuff that you might be interested in. I can tell you I was born at a very early age and raised in a Christian atmosphere. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I came into the old suburban group in Dallas, Texas. I made my first meeting there out of the treatment center I was in. That first meeting would have been somewhere in the early part of October of 1972. That was the first meeting that I went to that I didn't have to go to. And that's a memorable occasion to me. My first meeting in Alcoholics Anonymous was a very meaningful experience to me, and I hope that if there's anyone here tonight and this might be your first meeting, then this might be a meaningful experience for you. I didn't have to go. The fellow that ran the treatment center came by the ward. It's interesting, the treatment center, this building was called the Convalescent Center, and it had 7 floors on it. And the 6th floor was where they had the alcoholic treatment center. And they had some old people on some of them other floors. I never did know what they had on that 7th floor. Nobody would ever tell us what was up there. And we probably didn't want to know. But anyhow, this guy came by and he said, "How would you like to attend an AA meeting with me tonight?" And I said, "I think I would like that." And he said, "I'll be back at 5, and he came back at 5 and picked me up, took me out to dinner, bought my dinner. And I'll never forget, we went out to the North Park Shopping Center, one of the kind of in the ritzy part of Dallas, and I didn't get out there very much in those days. And we had dinner, and then we went to his house. And now it's a little before 7 that we got to his house. The meeting started at 8. And I share this with you to because of the learning experience it was for me. That and I'll get to that in just a second. But we got to his house, and he said, "Just sit down." And he set me down in the living room. He turned the TV on, and Gunsmoke was on. And I thought, well, maybe he's changed his mind. We're not going to the meeting. We're just going to stay here at his house and watch Gunsmoke. And I got into watching Gunsmoke. I hadn't seen it in a while, and this is way back. And I was really into this Gunsmoke thing, and I heard him move around back there in the back of the house, and then a little bit he came out and had on a jacket and a tie, and he was ready to go. He said, "All right, let's go." And he said, "It's time to go to the meeting. It's now 7:30, and I'm halfway through the Gunsmoke." And I said, "Well, what about Gunsmoke?" He said, "What about it?" I said, "We only watched half of it." He said, "You watched half of it." And he said, "I never watched Gunsmoke. I already know how." He said, "Matt always wins. Don't worry about it." And we're going down to the, driving down Walnut Hill Lane toward the Suburban Club, and we passed this big church. And he said, "That's where I go to church." And I thought, now I hope he don't ask me to go to church with him. I'll go to this meeting with him, but I hope I don't want to do that. And he made this comment. He said, he goes to my meetings and I go to his. Well, I get out to the Suburban Club and I'm looking for the priest from the church. It just went right over my head that he goes to my meetings and I go to his. You can tell you how spiritual I was at the time. And we got out to that meeting and got out to that club, and Tony drove a little old yellow Volkswagen, and we drove up into that parking lot. And Tom knows about an old Suburban Club. This is where they call it the Silk Stocking Club in Dallas at the time. And we just pulled right up between all them Cadillacs and Lincolns and Mercedes and got out. And we went inside. There was two fellows met us at the door, and they were dressed a little. They also had on a coat and tie, and they were the greeters. And one of them's name was Billy, and one was Emery. And they took me inside, and Billy said, "Come on in." And Tony said, "This is Larry's first meeting." And he took me back to the coffee room, and he got me some coffee. He got my coffee for me, got me a half a cup of coffee. That's a newcomer cup. And set me down, and every time somebody would come in, he would stand up, and then I did everything he did. And he'd stand up, and I'd stand up. And he said, "This is Larry. It's Larry's first meeting." And that went on until somebody rang a bell, and it was 8 o'clock, and we went into the big meeting room, a room about this size, set up, the chairs set up theater style. And we went down to the front row. And I asked him why he sat on the front row, and he said, "I always sat on the front row." And I later learned that that's hopeless row, and that's where he wanted to put me. And we heard three speakers. I don't know. One of them was a young guy. Said he'd been sober 5 years, and I knew better than that. I mean, he's way too young to have not had anything to drink. He wasn't but like 24, 25 years old. And then there was a guy that had 5 months, and I remember his story. I remember more about his talk than I do the other two talks. There was a lady there that had 10 years, and she talked. And I don't even remember her name, but that's not really important. What happened, my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous, I believe, was a by-the-book introduction. And when the meeting was over, there was a guy. Somebody had asked me, I was in the car business back then, and somebody said, "There's a guy, do you know a guy named Joe Snow?" Joe Snow was a guy that fired me off my last job. And I said, "Yeah, I know Joe." And they said, "Well, he'll be here tonight." And I thought, that's all I need, isn't it? I come over here, I was gracious enough to come to the meeting with this guy, and now, I'm going to see somebody will see me here. And that's the last thing I want somebody to do was see me in an AA meeting. And never dawned on me that Joe would be there for the same reason that I was there. And I saw Joe that night, and then Tony carried me back over to the hospital. I learned that night how to go to an AA meeting. I learned to get there early. I I learned the importance later on, how important it must have been to that guy that carried me to cause me to want to do the same thing for somebody else. And the people, how they welcomed me in. And when I left there, I couldn't wait to get back. That was my first experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when my time was up in that hospital, I got out of the hospital went in there on a Monday, and I got out on a Monday, and that Monday night, we went back to that meeting. My wife drove me back to that meeting, and that is, nothing's changed. She drove me to this meeting tonight. Somebody said, how do you get her to do that? And I said, it's real simple. She don't like my driving. And I don't make a point out of it. I mean, it just, it isn't worth the argument that it would create. But I appreciate that. And now that's how I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, how I got my first meeting. Now, how I got to Alcoholics Anonymous started somewhere back in the early 50s when I was 15 years old and I took my first drink. That's what started my journey to Alcoholics Anonymous. Don't know what started yours. But I always like to say I had my first drink when I was 15, and I was a social drinker for about 15 or 20 minutes. That was the end of my social drinking. I was talking to a guy this morning. We have a former member of AA that used to be a member of my home group, who has decided about a month ago, made the decision after almost 17 years that they were not alcoholic. And they no longer needed AA and started drinking again. And right now that individual is doing some controlled drinking. And I was talking to a guy about the other day, and he said, would you want to drink like that? I said, I have no desire to drink like that. I would not want to do that. I can't even fathom trying to do something like that. I've been there and done that. I drank for 5 years, and then I quit drinking in 1959 is when I quit drinking. And I stopped drinking in 1972. It took me 13 years to stop after I quit, and I can't tell you how many times I rededicated myself to that promise I made to myself that July afternoon in 1959 down there in Cordova, North Carolina. I thought Tommy forgot I was from down there. I don't know many people from down there anymore. I don't go down there anymore. Nobody goes to Cordova. Probably a lot of people in this room probably wonder where that's at. Well, it's probably 35, 40 minutes from here. It's 5 minutes from Rockingham, just down US 1 and 4 miles out of town and make a right, and it's a mile down into Cordova. But nobody goes there. There's no reason to go there. Nobody comes through there going anywhere. It's so out of the way. And anyhow, but that's where I was raised. I don't ever want to forget that I come from there. And I make light of it sometimes, but that's where I grew up and got married. I got married. I didn't get married in Cordova. I got married in a little Presbyterian church the first time, somewhere between Rockingham and Robberdale. I know y'all are really interested in all this geography. Now, most of you probably know where Rockingham is. A few of you, Tom knows where Robberdale is. That's where I reside. When I come here, we've got a little place down in Robberdale. But I married, and we got married there in 1960. Now, I don't have any way of proving this, but I'm pretty much convinced that the Secretary of War signed our marriage papers. This was a pretty good relationship that we had. We had a pretty good thing going. I was 20 and she was 18. Almost 18, and she might have. I don't know. I was 20 when I met her, and I was 21 when we got married, and she had turned 18, and it was really a nice. We were pretty cool. Back in those days, I was a pretty cool guy. I had one of Elvis Presley haircuts, I know you can get a picture of that real quick, you know. And I had it was something else. And I had real dark hair and, you know, I always did the collar thing. But yeah, Betty, I had bought an old 53 Ford. And I tell you how cool it was. Now, I'd quit drinking. I remember I met Betty right after I quit drinking in the summer of '59. And that first night I was with her, she asked me if I drank, and I told her no. Because I didn't. I had quit. And if you quit, you don't drink. I mean, it's that simple. And she said, "Do you drink, Larry?" And I said, "No." She said, "Good." And I thought, wow, now, there we go. I've been wondering what the answer to that question was. Because usually I would make some excuse or rationalize, you know, why I drink or thing, but this was really good. No. And that was my question from that point to right now. That's my answer to that question. And I had this old 53 Ford, and it was a pretty slick-looking little old car, and it'd be a big car now, and I had a buddy that was pretty good freehand, and we took some red fingernail polish, and he painted on my side, on the driver's side, he just painted in really pretty script-looking letters. He's painted Larry on there. And then on the other door, he's painted Betty Lou. And so, I mean, we were just so cool. And then we got married, and the letters fell off the car. It was not good. We stayed married 5 years. I won't go into all the details of that. But it seemed like we fought all the time. She did all the fighting. She did all the hitting, and I did all the receiving. I've been hit with everything that you can imagine that would qualify as a household item. I may be tonight the only guy in the room who's ever been hit with a meatloaf. I mean, you just didn't want to mess with her when she was busy doing something. And I never knew what I'd said to upset her. And anyhow, that's kind of the way that deal was. Now, we didn't fight all the time. We had 2 children coming out of that marriage. And so you have to time out occasionally. But that marriage would be kind of akin to a newcomer relationship in AA. Now, I've seen a lot of wonderful things happen in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've sponsored a guy, and I've sponsored him for 38 years now. And he married a gal, but they dated for 17 years. And they had a wonderful relationship. 2 AA members. There is such thing as that working, but I'm talking about newcomer relationships. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those develop and then just disappear. It's kind of what they do. I love to eavesdrop on those conversations where, you know, there's a little girl comes into the room, and it comes in the meeting room, and one of the guys spot her because she's brand new, nobody's ever seen her. And I always lay this one to the guys. I know it works both ways, and then one of those guys, kind of, one of the newer guys, he'll kind of sidle up to her, and if you listen real close, you hear something like this. It goes, "I haven't seen you before. How much time have you got in?" And her response would most likely be, "Well, I've got 30 days. And then how much time do you have?" And he says, "Well, I got 90 days. And then she's just awestruck by all that time. And next thing you know, they wander off. We don't know where they go because we'll never see them again. And the guy's sponsor brought this years ago, brought his girlfriend in my office one day, and I was sponsoring him at the time. And he introduced her, and they sat down, and he said, "We're going to move in together." And I said, "Well, why are you going to do that?" "Well, we just feel like it's God's will." And I said, "Well, why do you want to blame God for this coming disaster?" God gets blamed for a lot of things he's not really responsible for. That's kind of what it was like, and I guess I could have saved you a good 5 or 6 minutes. And the quick version of that, and if you get a real quick picture of that, is it's kind of like 2 ticks and no dog. They just suck the life out of each other, you know. Well, that thing was over right after Christmas. I think it was 64. Shortly after Christmas, our daughter Kimberly had been born in October. Prior to that Christmas, our son Daryl was born in 1961, so he was 3. And I got up one morning and packed a bag, and I didn't have a car, but I had a lot of desire to leave and do better. I wasn't, in my mind, I wasn't leaving her. And I've done a lot of things that turned out to be disasters that were well intended. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but my intentions were always good. And my intention was to go up to Greensboro, North Carolina, and get a job, and then get Betty and the kids to come up there, and we'd start a new life up there. And I'd get her away from her mama, because I thought her mama was the problem. And she might have been, but probably not. She was a tough old bird, I know that. She lived to be 101 and didn't surprise anybody. She lived that long. Didn't surprise me. I'm a little bit disappointed that she ain't still living. And she died a couple of years ago, 101 years old. So she had something going for her. I don't know what it was, but anyhow, I don't know if I'd ever want to live that long or not. But when I got up to Greensboro, I was interviewing for a job. And I might as well go ahead and tell you, Betty, I'd never told Betty about this plan. I was going to do all that, so I did things in those days. I'd go ahead and do it and get it set up, and then try to bring you into it and tell you this is what we're going to be doing. Never asked anybody what they thought. And I've been married to the same woman now for almost 46 years, and she'll tell you that I never asked her what she thought about anything until after we got into the program. Anyhow, I'm sitting up there, and I got this job. I'm interviewing for this job up in Greensboro, and the interview went well. I knew it did. And at the end of the interview, the guy said, Larry, I got one more question I need to ask you. And I said, what is that? And he said, do you drink? And I said, no. Now, I got to tell you that first time I quit drinking, I didn't drink anything for almost 3 years. Then I picked up my first drink right down the street from where we're at right now. After almost 3 years not drinking. Used to be a little place down there called the Sandwich Shop. And you'd have to be an old Southern Pines person to remember the Sandwich Shop. And they served sandwiches and beer, and that's where I had I went in there one day and bought 2 beers. And then the next time, and that's my control drinking. And I didn't drink anything for a few days, then went down to the old VFW club and drank 2 beers down there and got away with it. And about a week or so after that, went back to the VFW club to a party and got a little out of control that night. Last thing I remember about that night is a guy throwing me off his back porch. I don't know what I'd done or said, but that's how that went. But anyway, he said, and then I did that for 6 months, and then I didn't drink anymore. I made another promise. Made another pledge. I did all, and thought in my mind was making a conscious decision to never drink again. An alcoholic is not capable of doing that, I don't think. If he was, I would have went through with that in '59, and I went through with it again in '62. But I made a conscious decision to never drink again, and I made promises that I never would, and I did that again on Christmas Day of 1962 or '63. So anyhow, I wasn't drinking when the guy did this interview thing, and he said, "Do you drink?" And I said, "No." And then I said, "Why did you ask me that?" And he said, "Well, the reason I asked you that question, Larry, is the guy you're going to replace in our company is an alcoholic, and we're not hiring any more of those." And I said, and I don't blame you. I wouldn't hire one of them. I give a half dozen good reasons why we should never let alcoholics work in our company. And I went to work for him, went over to Burlington, North Carolina. I'm I got hired in as a credit manager. It seemed like it was some kind of manager. It was a credit manager because they sent me out to collect on the bills that wasn't get paid. And I cleaned up. I did him a good job. I cleaned up a lot of the books. We had somewhere around 100 delinquent accounts, and in about 3 or 4 months, I'd brought them all current except for maybe a dozen or so, and we just couldn't find those. So I did the guy a good job. I could do good work. I'm a guy that I'm the first guy to get there every morning and the last guy to leave at night, and I work 10 times harder than the guy next to me while I'm there because I think I have to. And that's just the way I was. And but I'm there about, I guess, maybe 6 months or so, must have been. And one afternoon he come out on the floor and he said, "Larry, we're closing at 5:30 today. And JD and Will have gone down to the liquor store and they're going to get a bottle and we're going to have a little drink at the close of business. Come down to the office and have a drink with us." I said, "Well, I don't drink." He said, "I know." He said, "About 5:30, just stop by the office and have a drink with us." I thought, this is, maybe he didn't understand. So I re-emphasized the fact that, I don't drink, Ed. His name was Ed. And he said, "Son, I know you don't drink." He said, "We're just going to have a drink." I thought, oh, wow, that should be okay. So for the next 2.5, 3 hours, I'm thinking about the drink. Now I know that these guys they're just doing their job, doing what they get paid to do. I couldn't have sold a piece of furniture if somebody could, you'd had to take it away from me. All I can think about is we are going to party at 5:30 tonight. We're going to get it turned on down here. That's the way my mind worked. And I get down to the office and I'm ready to, a drink is already, that's vanished a long time. I'm ready to, go do some drinking with these guys. Mentally, I'm already there. I think in most cases, I'm not an expert on anything, but I from my experience, my observation in Alcoholics Anonymous, in most cases that I've seen, the drink had been ordered long before it was ever taken by some fashion or some action or lack of action. And it's just like this member I mentioned earlier. I know that member stopped coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, stopped taking commitments in Alcoholics Anonymous well over a year ago. And so that drink had already been ordered. But anyhow, I get down to the office, and there they are. There's Ed and JD and Will and at the desk, and there's a chair for me, and on the desk is some cups and some ice and some juice in the bottle. And they had bought a pint. And my first reaction to that was, what are we going to do with this? Well, I'm the only guy in the room doing the math on the pint. And I'm doing the math. It's 4 ounces any way you figure it if it's evenly distributed. So the upshot of that whole deal was we finished that little fella off, and Ed got in his car and went home to his family, and JD and Will got in their car and go home to their family. I didn't follow either one of them home, but I know they did that because that's what they always did. And then I left for California because that's what I do. I leave town. It didn't take me 5 minutes to figure out that I never liked that rotten job to start with. Didn't like Ed. Didn't like nothing about it. Didn't like anything. What happened is a guy said, "Have you ever been to California?" And I said, "No, but I've always wanted to go." He said, "Well, let's go." I said, "Let's go." And we loaded up everything we had. An old 57 Cadillac belonged to him, and we headed to California. And I lived in a fantasy world anyhow, as you might imagine. And most of us probably did, but in those days, and when we were living that practicing alcoholic life, and I'm thinking California's going to be wonderful. This is really going to be good, because I heard a lot about California, and everything that seemed like everything that we got over here on the East Coast that was worthwhile got started over there. And I thought, well, I get out there and I get in on the front end of some of this stuff. And there were some people that I was starting to, they were kind of mysterious to me at the time. But the guys, the men in this particular group, were letting their hair grow real long, and some of them grew facial hair, and a lot of it, and they wore them open-toed shoes and flowered clothes, and run around doing that all the time. And I thought, and the hippie movement had just started, and I thought that's what I'll do is I'll go out there and I'll join up with those guys, and because they were all in the business of trying to find themselves, and that's what. And so I go out there and I'll find when I find myself, I'll get a job and I'll make some of that big money they make out there. Then I come back to North Carolina, and I'll go see Betty and the kids, and I'll explain to them where I've been, because I told nobody I was leaving. Nobody knew. The only guy that knew when I left was a guy I was in the car with, but I didn't really mean to stay gone. My intent was I needed a couple of months. And I had a lot of trouble. You don't have to be drinking to have a lot of trouble in your life. I don't need to tell anybody that. But that was the plan. And the big thing then was finding yourself. Sam and I my wife Sam, she and I go to the little hamburger joint in Mesquite, Texas called the Country Burger. And Country Burger has got a sign by their cash register, still there, been there for years. And I just got a feeling that the lady that runs that was one of us back in the 60s, because her sign says, "I have gone to find myself. Should I return before I get back, please have me wait." And I looked at Sam, first time I saw it, I said, I could have used that. I could have used that. But anyhow, well, we made it all the way to Fort Worth. Fort Worth's a bad place to live, so we backed up over to Dallas. Or I did. I thought Fort Worth was just got to be a bad place to live. I didn't like the police department. It didn't seem to me like they didn't like me either. So anyhow, I go to Dallas, and I was got in the car business out there, and I worked hard. I made a lot of money. I got a lot of promotions, and I wished many times that I'd have hung on to some of that money. The money I had in my pocket on the 18th of September 1972, when my wife dropped me off or unloaded me at that hospital down on Gaston Avenue in Dallas, the money I had in my pocket was the change from a $5 bill that she had given me to go buy some cigarettes and a couple other items before I went into that hospital. That was it. And all the money I'd gotten in the last year or two prior to that had come from her. I was a real hot dog in the car business. I mean, I was everybody's fair haired boy. I was a guy that was, going to really make it big. But the booze kept getting in the way. And I want to kind of let you know what my life was like. What it seemed was not what it was. What it seemed was, here's a young man in his late 20s with a lot of ambition, a strong work ethic, who's really going to get to the top in his business. That's what it seemed to be. But what was really going on was a young man in his late 20s who was absolutely scared to death every day of his life that somebody was going to find out the truth about him. That was my biggest fear. And every day, and without exception, every day, every morning I woke up, every night that I laid my head on a pillow, I couldn't get what I had done out of my mind. I had the morals of an alley cat and the conscience of a priest. I mean, that was the best way I can describe what my existence. I did a lot of things to try to cover that up. I met this girl in the middle of January of 1966, and she and I started dating, and she had a good job, good credit. I mean, she's a perfect match for a guy like me, and had a willingness to help a guy out when he was in trouble. Right after Sam and I started dating, I got locked up one night in the drunk tank at Dallas City Jail. And she was the only person I knew to call. Well, I knew one other person. But we'd been dating for a little while, and I called Sam and told her that I'd been arrested and I was in jail and I could get out at 7 o'clock in the morning if she could get some money down there. She'd bring the money down there. I'd certainly get it back to her. She said, well, I'll be there. And then I thought, what if she don't come? I don't have any money. What if she don't come? So I knew this other girl, so I called her and told her my story. And she said, well, Larry, I'd be glad to do that for you. And so I knew that one of them would show. And when I got off, as I stepped off the elevator in the basement of that old Dallas City Hall, where that old jail was, I looked down the hall, and there's both of them down there. And I don't move. I thought, I better stay here and let them work that out. And, one of them's going to do this, and it don't matter to me which one. But if you've ever heard my wife give her outline talk, she'll tell you that she won that battle that morning, that she won the prize. She'd wanted to give it back many times, but she won it that night. Or that morning. And the last time, like I said, we got married in the spring of 1967. Nobody thought the marriage would last. I'm sure we didn't either. I don't think either one of us would have put any real money on it. And it almost ended at 6 months. Now, by this time, I had moved up the ladder a little further in the car business. I was general manager of a fairly good-sized automobile dealership here in Dallas. And the guy just, he gave me the keys to everything. And I called her one Saturday afternoon, about 5. I said, we're going to close at 6. I'm going down and have a couple of beers with a couple of guys, and I should be home around 7:30, 8 at the latest. And she was okay with that. I did go down and have a couple of beers with those guys. I don't know what happened to them. I have very little recall of what happened to me that night. I know that I got home the sun was up pretty good in the sky when I got in on Sunday morning. And when I stood in front of the door, and before I opened that door, I knew there'd be a woman on the other side of that door with a lot of questions, and I had all the answers. I was ready. Well, I opened the door, and she wasn't there. So I go look for her, and I find her in the bedroom lying on the bed, fully clothed, shoes and all, same clothes she had on when I left for work the day before. This was the first time that I had stayed out all night. It's the first time I'd stayed gone overnight, and I'd been late almost every time. I'd be late, but I wouldn't stay all night. And and there she was, and I looked at her. She's lying on the bed. She looked at me. She doesn't say anything. I don't say anything, and I don't know how long that lasted, probably a few seconds. And then I left the room, and when I come back into the bedroom, I was prepared to join her in the bed. Because this keen alcoholic mind up here said she was in the bed. She hadn't been to bed, and she was on the bed. There's a lot of difference, if you don't know that, of being on a bed and in a bed. And I'd never paid any attention to it till that morning. And so I go around my side of the bed, and I turn the covers down, and I get into bed. And when I get into bed, she gets off the bed. She gets off the bed, she opens the drawer to her night table, and from that drawer, she extracts a .38 pistol. And I began to watch her with great anticipation, as you might imagine. And then I thought, there's no reason to panic. The gun's not loaded. Well, she's smarter than I am, or as smart, at least. And she remembered the gun wasn't loaded, and she reached back into the drawer and took out 2 bullets. She pushed the lever. It was a revolver. She pushed the lever. The wheel fell open. She slid 2 rounds in there and closed it up, pulled the hammer back, and then the line went up with the firing pin, and I hear it click. been dead silence up to now. That click's the only sound that was in that room up to now. And my only thought that I could muster was one of us needs to create some kind of dialogue. And I was confused. I wasn't confused about what was fixing to happen. I knew what was about to happen. And I mean, it's pretty simple. You know, somebody's got a loaded gun pointed at you. It's pretty simple what's about to take place. But before I go, I got a question. And I raised my hand, I'm sure I did, to see if I could ask the question. I want to make sure that we keep the peace here. And I said, can I ask you a question? And she said, yeah. And I said, why did you just put 2 bullets in that gun? And she said, well, before I answer that, let me tell you, Larry, I can't live like this. I can't do this. It's like, I didn't sign up for this. I absolutely cannot live this way. And so the answer to your question is, we are not going to live like this. And the dialogue lasts a lot longer than that, but for the sake of time, all you need to do is make the point anyhow. We're not going to live like this, Larry. And the answer to your question is that one of these bullets is for you, and the other one is for me. Because, Larry, we're not going to live like this. And obviously was able to talk her into trying something else, and get that gun put away. The first time she heard me tell that story, I was many years into the program, and I shared that story at a meeting that I was talking at one night there in Dallas, and on the way home she said, Larry, I got to tell you something. I really need to talk to you. And I don't like to hear that start with, And I thought, well, I figured I'd done something wrong, and I said, well, what's it about? She said, well, it has to do with the talk you made. And by the way, it was a decent talk, and she never has been real complimentary. But anyhow, and that's not what we're here for. We don't, I won't seek compliments anyhow. But the talk is what it is. She said it has to do with the story you told about that incident with the gun. And she said, I remember that almost precisely the way you told it. I think that's an amazing thing. But she said, I've been wanting to tell you something for years, and you have provided me with the best opportunity that I have ever had and may ever have, and I just want to tell you the truth about that situation. I said, and what is that? She said, Larry, the truth is, I never intended to use my bullet. So we call that ego deflation at depth. I can fast forward 5 years, not to the day, but I can guarantee you somewhere within 2 weeks. It's Sunday night, and I'm on my back looking up at her. And I didn't know at the time, but I was about to do some things that would constitute my last drunk. I don't know, I've never met anybody that knew that last one was their last one. But every alcoholic has a drunk that is meaningful, and that's his last one. I remember early on picking up a drink. I remember, but that night and the things that happened that night are registered up here, and I hope to God that I never lose these memories. I looked up at her, and I was having some of those same thoughts that she was having on that Sunday morning the 5 years before. It wasn't a we, it was a I. And I remember saying to her, I can't live like this. I'd been on about a 3-week drunk. I'd lost another job. And we were living, she and I and our little girl, Laurie, were living with her mother, who was kind enough to let us have 2 rooms in her house. And I said, I can't live like this. And I said something that I'd never said in the 33 and a half years of living. And I said to her, would you please find me some help? Because I knew down deep in my knower that if this was to change, I had to have help. That I had given my best shot, and nothing that I'd ever tried had worked. And believe me, I'd tried everything that you can imagine, but nothing worked. And she said, "Who would you like me to call?" And I don't know who to call. And the TV was on, and on the TV screen was a commercial for this place I told you about earlier. It simply said, the Center Hospital for the treatment of alcoholism. If you have a problem with alcohol, call this number. And I said, go call those people. And so she did. And so here we are. As a result of a phone call, here we are. As a result of a phone call made on Mother's Day weekend in 1935 in Akron, Ohio, here we are. As a result of a phone call made in the late fall of 1934 by one amputee and called Lois W. to find out where she and Bill were living so he could go see Bill. As a result of that phone call, here we are. My wife says that on every alcoholic, not just alcoholics, but in particular every alcoholic's gratitude list, if they make one, should be Alexander Graham Bell, the guy that invented the telephone. But in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, they called it nickel therapy. Then they called it dime therapy. Pick up the phone. Now, sometimes pick up that 1,000-pound phone, man, it'll save your life. And she picked that phone up that night and brought me to this man. And then he brought me to you. And then what you asked me to do, after much reluctance for the first 9 or 10 months, I started doing. When we arrived down in Robberdale yesterday afternoon, I made amends, obviously. I was able to make amends to Betty and to those children, and to my mom and dad and my brothers and my sister down in Cordova and people I owed. I got all that done, obviously. Yeah, I can walk the streets of Rockingham, a town that I never thought I'd ever be able to return to. And I can go and come as I please. And I smile and say hello to everybody that I see. I don't know them anymore, but I smile and say hello. When we arrived yesterday, and I'll tell you, I was talking to a fellow sponsor this morning, there is nothing to take the place of the power of forgiveness. Nothing. There's nothing to compare it to. There's no other act of care, of compassion, of empathy, or whatever we want to call it, that can compare to that. When we got there yesterday, we opened our icebox. Now Betty, my first wife, the mother of those 2 children, who are now grown and living their own lives, lives next door to this little place we have down there. And we open the icebox and there's a casserole dish in there. And it says bake at 350 degrees for 40 minutes. She knew we were coming. So she prepared something for us to have for dinner. And then there's a pie in there that said, let's sit till Thursday. It's a pineapple icebox pie. We didn't ask for that. It was just there. Healing takes place in here. This is a place of healing where the individual goes through a healing process through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and his life and her life changes. And then families undergo healings through the process of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and the principles that are embedded in those steps. Relationships get healed. I just retired last summer. I was a guy that I couldn't keep a job 30 days. I just retired from a line of work where I'd completed 33 years of the same line of work. 4 years in one place and 29 years in the other. I am not that guy that fellow brought to Alcoholics Anonymous that Monday night. I am not that guy. I'm the guy that because of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, those principles there, the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous and the principles there, the principle of service. I'm the guy that you guys and people like you helped me change to be the person I am today. And I will be eternally grateful for that. And I thank you for that. And I thank you for my life. And thank you, Tom.